Good. Yeah.
Yeah, so ma'am, when we start solving a differential equation, if we want to divide throughout by a certain term, then what do we do at the points where that term goes to zero? Can we not divide, or
No. See, sometimes what happens is, as we have discussed examples in class, no, let me sort of pull out one such example. Give me a minute. So maybe I should. So what you do is, you solve the equation carefully in the sense described below. Yeah, let me just start by sharing an exam slide. Yeah. So, okay. So this is not what I have. So do you roughly remember which lecture did we do such example? What is this? Let me just quickly see. Maybe lecture 4 had this. Yeah. Let's see. Over here we did, but I think the explanation is in the lecture 3 slides. Yeah, sorry. Okay. So for example, this is one such example, right? In the setting that you are describing, right? You are dividing by y, right?
yes,
Here,
ma'am.
right? And so the first thing is that you cannot divide by y just like that. You have to say that you have to look at this situation first. That so for example, in this example, if y identically 0, so for example in this example you want to divide by y, and you have to be careful about this. Yeah, so if y identically 0 is a solution, you make a note of it separately, and then then you make a statement like this, that suppose that there is a non-trivial solution of the ODE or the initial value problem, or whatever the case may be. uh, that means that y not identically 0, y1 is a solution of this ODE, and y1 is not identically 0, right? So then by assumption, y1 is a solution of, let's say, first order differential equation. So this is assumed to be differentiable. In particular, it is continuous. So it does not assume the value 0 at a point. It will not assume the value 0 in a sign interval around that point. So on that interval, you do the entire computation, right? And then, once you have the solution, once you have worked out the solution, for example, in this example, it makes sense even if y not equal to 0. It may not be the case in general. Yes. So sometimes you just say that, this is a solution valid on that interval only. But sometimes the solution itself, what you compute, you can look at it and say that, this solution would make sense throughout wherever we define. So depending on, each example separately, you have to investigate and examine. There's sort of no general thumb rule.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Thank
hope I
you.
answer your question, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Thank
Okay. All right. Okay. Anything else?
Ma'am, I had a doubt in the y dash is equal to 10 by 3 x y raised to power 2 by 5 1.
Okay, so this is in lecture 3 or 4? 4,
Lecture,
no? Lecture
lecture
4, existence and uniqueness theorem.
Yes, ma'am, existence and uniqueness.
Let's see. Uh, Let me pull out the relevant slide.
Yes, ma'am.
This example?
Yes, ma'am, with the initial values given.
So you want to talk about this one, right?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
yes, okay.
So, ma'am, in this we are saying that in the range -1 to 1, we are only getting one answer, and if we increase the range,
Right.
then we can change the
Then the
value.
uniqueness is not guaranteed. Correct.
Oh.
Yes.
And in all the different answers for the bigger range, in the interval -1 to 1, it would remain the same.
Say that again. Give me a minute. I'll just close the window. It's raining hard here and I'm not able to hear. Give me a minute. Yeah. Sorry for the interruption. Yeah, go ahead. What is that you wanted to say?
And even if we consider a bigger interval than -1 to 1,
yes,
then also in the range -1 to 1, the answer would remain the same. We can only change the outside.
Correct.
Right?
So this initial value problem has a unique solution on the interval -1 to 1. Correct. So even if there is a solution outside the interval -1 to 1, that solution will have to agree with this solution. Namely, it has to be of the form x square minus 1 to the power of 5 by 3 on the interval -1 to 1. Absolutely correct.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Correct? Yeah, absolutely correct.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. For example, we have an example here, right? So this is just an example, but your understanding is absolutely correct. Okay. Does it answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, great. Anything else?
Hello.
Yes, please. Yes.
Ma'am, can you explain again why you take the interval -1 to 1 again? I did not get it.
Okay, so let's just run through this example from the very beginning. Yeah, so let's see. So let's just recall the statement of the existence and uniqueness theorem, that is first, and then so where is the statement? Here it is. Yeah. So I have a first order linear or perhaps non-linear ODE with initial data, right? And what is this existence and uniqueness theorem tell us? That if f is continuous on a certain rectangle containing the point x naught, y naught, then this initial value problem 1 has at least one solution on some open interval of AB containing the point x naught. Yeah? So this theorem does not give us any information per se how to detect that interval, correct? And secondly, this is the uniqueness assertion, that if it so happens that both the function f and the partial derivative of f with respect to y variable are continuous on this rectangle, then the initial value problem as stated in 1 has a unique solution on some subinterval of the interval AB that contains the point x naught, correct? So having recalled this theorem, what is that we were doing in this example? Yeah. So let's just see this example first, right? Before I take up the example that you really wanted to discuss, right? So I have this initial value problem. Dy by dx is 10 by 3 x y to the power 2 by 5 and y at x naught equals to y naught, right? Now, in this example, the function f is continuous throughout, yeah, throughout R2 for all values of x and y. Okay. So it follows by the existence theorem that this initial value problem has a solution for every x naught, y naught, right? Now let's look at the partial derivative of the function f with respect to the y variable. What is it? If you do the calculation, it turns out to be 4 by 3 xy to the power minus 3 by 5, right? Evidently, the partial derivative of f with respect to the y variable is continuous for all points x and y as long as y does not assume the value 0, correct? Is that okay? Is everybody with me up till this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So this is saying that if the initial data point y naught is different from 0, then there is an open rectangle on which both the function f and the partial derivative of f with respect to y are continuous, and hence this initial value problem has a unique solution. Now, what happens in y equal to 0 is what we don't know. Yeah, that this theorem doesn't say. Okay. Now, let's look at this problem. Now, I have slightly tinkered the initial data. At x naught equal to 0, y takes the value minus of 1, right? Okay. All right. Now, since y naught here is minus of 1, which is different from 0, then both the function f and the partial derivative of f are partial derivative of f with respect to the y variable are continuous. So the existence and uniqueness theorem says that the solution exists and is unique in a interval around the point origin. Correct? Yes. Now that's the first thing, right? So let's try to find out that solution. Now, since y at 0 is minus 1, y is the solution of this differential equation. So which means that y is differentiable, in particular y is continuous. So there must be an open interval around the origin on which y does not take the value 0. So on this interval, one can separate the variables and integrate, correct? Okay, so what you get is the following, yeah? You get 5 by 3, y to the power 3 by 5 is 5 by 3 x square plus c. And you compute the value of the constant c using the initial data. Now, why do you say this is a unique solution to the initial value problem on minus 1 to 1? Yeah, this is your question, right? So let me sort of write down. So let me just write down the equation one more time. Dy by dx is, can somebody help me? What is the exact thing? 10 by 3 xy to the power 2 by 5. Yes. Y at 0 is minus 1. And so far we said that, what did we say? There is a solution of the form y equal to x square minus 1 to the power 5 by 3. Now, so our computation says this is a solution of the initial value problem star on a certain interval I. What is this interval I? I is this interval where y does not assume the value 0. Correct? Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So this interval I contains the point 0 because y at 0 is minus 1, which is different from 0. Right? Is that okay? So now,
Ma'am,
yes.
but if we put it in the equation, it
Okay.
satisfies the equation for like when y assumes 0, then also it satisfies.
Yeah. So what you're trying to say is that this is so let's just address that a little later. Huh? Let me just sort of answer the question first. The claim is that this is a unique solution of the initial value problem star on the interval minus 1 to 1. Yeah. So the question is, why is this unique and why is the sort of interval of validity of this solution is minus 1 to 1, right? There are two questions here, right? Now let's just go back to the existence and uniqueness theorem. Now, what does the existence and uniqueness theorem tell us? The existence and the uniqueness theorem tells us that this solution that we have found is a unique solution of the initial value problem on a certain subinterval of wherever f and the partial derivative of f of y are defined containing the origin. Correct? Is that okay? Yes. So in particular, the existence and uniqueness theorem tells us. So it follows from the Picard's existence and uniqueness theorem. That this is a unique solution to the given initial value problem on a certain interval around the point 0. Is that okay? So I am denoting that interval by minus epsilon naught to epsilon naught. Is that okay with everybody present here?
Ma'am,
Yes.
the interval may be unsymmetric.
It can be anything, you know, so you sort of take a smaller one. Yeah. So the interval,
Okay.
it may be, you know, it is, so let's say it's around origin. So this is, you know, so let's say it is not symmetric around the origin. So you pick epsilon naught smaller. Just an example, nothing else, right? You pick something smaller so that it becomes symmetric. Nothing, meaning there's no loss of generality in this assumption. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. In fact, you know, I can even make it to be a closed subinterval. I can even do this. Nothing is lost. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, nothing is lost for some epsilon naught positive. Now, what do? You apply, so what is that we happen? The Picard-Lindelof theorem, or, you know, a sort of a corollary of Picard-Lindelof theorem guarantees uniqueness on the interval minus epsilon naught to epsilon naught. Now, what do? But you repeat this argument at the endpoints minus epsilon naught and epsilon naught. So that would again give you uniqueness in a neighborhood of minus epsilon naught and epsilon naught. Is that correct?
Can you repeat, ma'am, what do you
All
say?
I'm trying to say, I'll write. Yeah. So Picard's, I will write that down. Picard's existence and uniqueness theorem. Guarantees uniqueness on this interval minus epsilon naught to epsilon naught, right? This bit is okay with everybody. Now what you do? Now repeat the same argument. Yeah, repeat this argument. What do you mean by I mean by saying repeat this argument? Meaning apply Picard's existence and uniqueness theorem one more time at the endpoints. At the endpoints epsilon naught and minus epsilon naught. So what do? So I will say repeating this argument at the endpoints epsilon and naught and minus epsilon naught would again give uniqueness in a neighborhood of minus epsilon naught and in a neighborhood of epsilon naught. Sorry, it's just sloppy here. Is everybody with me? Yeah, so you have the origin, and then you said that let's look at this interval minus epsilon naught and epsilon naught. The solution that we computed is unique on this subinterval, and what you do is apply now. So initially I had applied Picard's existence theorem taking x naught to be the origin. Now you apply the existence and uniqueness theorem taking epsilon naught as the initial data point. So you will get uniqueness in a tiny interval around the point epsilon naught. I can do that because both the function f and the partial derivative of f with respect to the y variable will be continuous in this neighborhood. Is that okay? And likewise, You get uniqueness in a tiny neighborhood of the interval minus epsilon naught to epsilon. So now you can stretch the the interval of validity to a larger subinterval. And you can play this game until you hit -1 to 1, but you cannot go beyond that, because what happens is the partial derivative of y partial derivative of f with respect to the y variable is not defined at the endpoints 1 and -1. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is that okay with everybody present here? Yes. So beyond that, you cannot sort of repeat this argument, right? That's the maximum limit possible. Yes.
But how can we do its rigorous calculation?
See, this is an existent argument, no? So at epsilon naught, you do this, right? And now you come here again at this point also, you can do the same argument again, because you have just, this is very rigorous. Meaning I'm just applying this theorem repeatedly, existence and uniqueness theorem. I'm just making sure that the hypothesis of the theorem is satisfies each time I am applying this theorem. This is very rigorous.
So can we say that, like, from this approach, it is very difficult to get the interval -1 to 1?
No, you don't say that it is very difficult to get the interval -1. You say that, you cannot, so you say that, so what is it exactly I have on the slide? That this is the unique solution to the initial value problem on the interval -1 to 1. You cannot repeat this set of argument that we just discussed about beyond the interval -1 to 1. Because of what because the partial derivative of f with respect to y variable fails to be continuous if y takes the value 0, and that's what precisely happens at the point x equal to ±1. See, look at this solution. At x equal to ±1, y takes the value 0. Correct? So the hypothesis of the theorem is not satisfied at that point, so we cannot apply that theorem beyond this interval. Is this okay?
Yes, ma'am. Like, so from a bit of guesswork, we can judge the initial interval, and then we can apply that repetitive approach. Like,
see, there is no guesswork here. It is very clear analysis. That's what I'm trying to convince you. There's no guesswork.
Ma'am, like the interval -1 to 1, we need to have an initial interval epsilon -epsilon naught to epsilon. I'm saying that we have to get from guesswork.
See, -epsilon naught is just a way of writing this. I'll tell you what. There's no guess even there. See, so what is that I have in this example? X naught is 0. So I am just writing. So the theorem says, no, on some open subinterval of AB that contains the origin. So I am just writing that open subinterval that contains the origin as -epsilon naught to epsilon naught. There is no guesswork here. Any interval around the origin will have can be written of this form, right? Will contain an interval of the form -epsilon naught to epsilon naught. So there is no guesswork, meaning there is no loss of generality in writing the statement. We are proceeding very, very logically, appealing to the theorem of existence and uniqueness each time. That's all.
No, ma'am. Like, if we might have chosen the initial interval to be -half to half.
Yes.
And then it would be very difficult for us, because then we would apply the theorem repetitively on -half, then we would get a small interval and again. So if we initially choose smartly -1 to 1.
No. So even if you apply to -half to half, no, then you realize, no, at the point 1, when you hit the point 1 and when you hit the point -1, you will run into trouble. Correct? So the same logic goes in there. There's nothing sacred about -epsilon naught to epsilon naught. That is just some subinterval containing the origin. Instead of saying some subinterval containing the origin, I just wrote it in -epsilon naught to epsilon naught, just to just to sort of demonstrate to you yet, you apply this argument one more time, and now, now you take x naught to be plus minus epsilon naught, and y naught to be epsilon naught square minus 5 by 3, and put look at the initial value problem, y of x naught equal to y naught, and the given ODE. What is it? Dy by dx equal to 10 by 3, yeah, something like that. 10 by 3 xy, uh, 10 by 3 xy to the power 2 by 5. Yeah, so you look at this initial value problem now, and you are applying the Picardson uniqueness theorem to this initial value problem now. So I just wrote it as epsilon naught, just to sort of clarify things. You write minus half to half. But at some point of time, you should realize that when you hit the points 1 and minus 1, you cannot apply the uniqueness theorem. The problem being the partial derivative of f with respect to the y variable is not defined. It fails to be continuous whenever y takes the value 0. Does that answer your question? Please ask if still, if there is a sticky point still.
Yes, ma'am, I got it now.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, ma'am. Really
So
need some
epsilon
practice.
naught is just a way of thinking, fixing things. You write something else. You write some open subinterval, and you denote the endpoints of that subinterval as a1, b1, and then you do this argument there. So it's just a way of sort of fixing things for clarity and transparency, nothing more.
Ma'am, so if we had an interval which contained 1, would the theorem fail for existence also, or only uniqueness?
No. So then the existence part is still true, as we see. See, the existence part relies only on the continuity of the function f, right? So that will still hold true. But only when the uniqueness statement is asserted, at least as far as this example is concerned, then there's a problem with the continuity of the partial derivative of f with respect to the y variable. So the existence goes through fine, no matter what the values of x naught and y naught are, as far as this example is concerned.
Ma'am, this solution which we found is a solution in minus infinity to infinity, only that it may not be unique on intervals beyond minus 1 to 1.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
All right.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, absolutely correct.
Ma'am, if any question, the dy by dx, if in that the denominator comes out to be 0 for maybe some value of x or y, so should we be taking that in some other consideration as dy by dx? If we exactly try to understand what it means 1 by 0, like it's a vertical line. It is not exactly undefined, but what should we be doing?
The solution curve at that point is this, yes.
Yes. So should we be like, if there is something like y is equal to something, maybe let's say a is at that point it comes out to be 0, means the denominator, then should we be considering that case while
say that again? What is that you want to say? Why? What is that you want?
At let's assume that at y is equal to a, the dy by dx has some format like 1 by 0.
So
Means
you
it
could also say
is equal to 1. Let's assume something
so it
1.
is undefined. Yeah, that's what you want to say.
Yes.
Okay.
But if we physically see that, then for a vertical line, if we define the slope, it will be delta y by delta x, and there delta x will be 0. But that line is not like exactly undefined. So should we be considering that y is equal to a case somewhere else and then take it to be a solution, or should we just go on solving?
So it depends, if the ODE is admitting a unique solution, that may not be the case in what you are saying, right? Isn't it?
Sorry, ma'am, I didn't understand. What did you say?
So all I'm trying to say is, see this. So my feeling is that my feeling is that ODE is admitting more than one solution at that point.
Just at that point.
My feeling is that, yeah, you need to sort of investigate case by case, but this is my feeling. See, sort of, what is the ODE? You need to investigate. I can't make a generic statement, that this will be true. But this is what I can guess.
So if we end up making graph of y is equal to x, then at that point we will have 2 points.
Y equal to, meaning what is it? So you're saying y equal to f of x is the solution curve. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes. Okay. Let us say it's f of x. Then if I start to plot f of x, then like it will not be a function at that point, right? As it has 2 solutions.
For example, many things can happen. No, you can have one solution curve looking like this and the other solution curve looking like this. All of that can happen, right?
But here we are talking about just one point, right? Not about a line, like not for all x or all y.
So it depends, it depends on what, meaning in each case separately. All I'm trying to say is at this point of time, given the, the information available, I can't make a generic statement. What is going to happen? Yes.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I think maybe if I get an example.
Yeah. So then maybe sort of we can understand, better is what my feeling.
If I can just make a example, like let's assume dy by dx is equal to 1 upon x minus a.
Okay.
Or let's say x minus 2, something like that.
All right.
So here at x is equal to 2, it will be a vertical line.
Yes.
Okay, this is quite simple. Okay, I don't think it should be a problem here.
So this is okay. And in fact, I think we sort of did discuss something like this in class. So if sort of.
But I think at that point, I didn't think about this vertical line thing very.
I think, so for example.
I think it was in the last, okay,
so
this one, yes.
Example, it comes up, right?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Right, it comes up sort of, is it sort of the same setting what you're trying to say, right? So what happens? So all I'm trying to say is one cannot make a general statement, right? That, which will address all such ODs in which this scenario arises. One has to sort of look at it and examine it separately, each example separately.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you have something concrete in mind, please sort of feel free to reach out.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
if I have any further doubts, I'll ask you
about this. Sure. You're welcome. So very welcome. Okay. Anything else?
Ma'am, is anything such that the interval of uniqueness should be symmetric about origin?
There's nothing like that, in just this example, it's so turned out. There's nothing like that. See this theorem, sorry. What is this? So this was done in lecture 4, maybe, the existence in uniqueness theorem. Let me just pull out the statement. Give me a minute. Here it is. See, the theorem statement, the statement of the theorem gives you absolutely no information about how to determine and what the uniqueness, the interval where the solution is unique looks like. So it just so happened that in this example, it turns out to be -1 to 1. You can cook up something else where it is not so. Yeah? So there is no sort of thumb rule here that it has to be like this. Nothing like that. Yes, is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And you said that you'll answer the question that if the initial value on Picard's Picard iteration method is not 0,0, then
so I told you that you should think about it, but if there's a problem, let's just discuss it now. So let's say this is how we construct the Picard iterates, right? Yes. So let's just see. So this is a solution. So our ideally I would like you to think about it, because this is also there in the tutorial. But there's nothing,
but I have asked for confirmation.
Let's just see this. Yes, this is our given ODE and this is the initial data. So what is that you do? You say that let y equal to phi of t, phi of x be a solution, right? Be a solution of this initial value problem, right? So so what is that we discuss in class? We discuss the following, that if x naught is same as y naught is 0, then there is a method of successive approximation. What is that you do? You say that phi 0 of t is identically 0. And how do you construct the first approximation to the solution? What you do is that you look at this function f and you look at the corresponding integral equation and you plug in phi naught in the integral equation. Yeah? So this is s, and integrate with respect to the variable of integration s, and then you do it from 0 to t, right? So that if you plug in, what is that you plug in? If you plug in phi 1 at the point 0 will turn out to be 0, correct? Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so maybe, I should sort of replace this by t everywhere. Make it t naught, just to sort of for uniformity. Let me just. So this is okay, right? T naught, phi of t and y of t. Correct? Is that okay? Now, yeah, let's just write down one more iterate. Phi 1 of t, if the next approximation is obtained by looking at the integral equation and plugging in the phi 1, right, in the integral equation, right? So I'll just be careful here. I would like to write s here, right? There's no t. S is the variable of integration, right? ds integral of t, right? And you go on, right? And how are these iterates constructed? The iterates are constructed so as to satisfy the initial condition, at least, yeah, which is the case in each of the what I have written here, and in the hope that in the limit we will get a solution, right? So there's some general theory there. Now, what if t naught and y naught were different to 0? Then what would you do? What is your guess? If the initial condition is y of t naught equal to y naught, where t naught and y naught are both different from 0, then what would you go? What would you do? What should be your first iterate? Zeroth iterate, rather, in the notation I have written.
Ma'am,
Why not?
We can do origin shift.
Yeah, so we can do origin shift, that is also possible, right? You do a linear change of coordinate and you reduce to, sorry, there's a t missing here, and you reduce to an appropriate equation here. That's also valid. Or, you do this here. Or you do this. It's the same thing either way. Right? Okay. And what should be your next approximation?
Y naught plus
Y naught plus
integral x naught to t.
X, so integral, so I'll say t naught to t. Yeah, you're right. Let's see. So integral, I'm not able to write here, t naught to t, and I have f of t
Comma phi 0 t.
Sorry, there's no t here. Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, I'm rather sloppy here. So s phi naught of s ds. Is that correct? Yes, and why did we do this? We chose phi 1 like this so as to make sure that phi 1 satisfies the initial condition.
Initial condition.
That's all. Right, and you go on like this. Correct? Or what you're suggesting is also correct, that you make an initial change of coordinates here, right? So as to, so that this in the new coordinates, this initial value problem has satisfied the initial condition that y at 0 is 0. That's also fine. Both are, sort of equivalent, whichever you find sort of more convenient to work with. So is this okay?
And
Hmm.
like, is there any guarantee that the series will always converge?
See, there is no guaranteed. This is one method of Picard, which sort of works under this assumption of what is this? The existence and uniqueness theorem. Here, yeah. So under the assumptions on point number 2 here, it seems to work. If both f and the partial derivative of f with respect to y variable are continuous. So actually these conditions can be relaxed a little bit, and that is the statement due to Picard-Lindelof. What they assume is f to be actually Lipschitz continuous, something like that. So, but under the conditions, under the hypothesis of this theorem part 2, Picard's iteration method works. Yeah, is that okay?
Ma'am?
Yes.
I mean, some questions during separation of variables, there are some points when the denominator goes to 0.
Yes.
So we generally exclude those points, or we can say that when the denominator goes to 0, we can say that we can solve the problem, and if the solution curve does not behave extra dramatically, then we can say though that that point can also be taken.
So as you said, one has to be careful. One has to be careful while dividing, and one has to investigate each case separately.
And if the solution curve does not means diverge at some point, then we can say no, that it will.
Right. So as I said, one cannot make a generic statement which will apply to every such sort of example. You look at each case separately, and sort of you look at that example and see what is happening in that example.
Okay.
Yeah, you just make a sort of, just be careful. Yeah. So what is that?
Ma'am, can you go to this? Ma'am, can you go to the slide where that problem was solved? 10 by 3 xy to the power of 2 by 5.
Yes, I can. Here it is.
I mean, this problem had the solution curve came out to be x square minus 1 to the power of 5 by 3.
Correct.
Ma'am, here in this part, when x goes to plus 1 and minus 1, the y goes to 0.
Y is equal
and we had
to
and we had solved under the assumption that y should not be equal to 0.
Yes.
Ma'am, but here we can take this point, ma'am. This point is coming in the solution curve because of the fact that y prime also goes to 0 at that point.
Say that again. What happens to y prime? Say that again.
Ma'am, I'm saying that this we are taking that this solution curve satisfies the point 1, 0 and minus 1, 0 because of the fact that y prime also goes to 0 at those points.
I don't see how y prime plays a role here.
And because in the original differential equation, the differential equation was y prime equals to 10 by 3 xy to the power of 2 by 5.
Okay.
So we were dividing by y, considering that y is not equal to 0.
Yes, but y does not take the value 0. Yes.
Taking the point 1, 0 and minus 1, 0, since y prime is also going to 0, this equation is consistent at that point.
So how is, I don't understand. What is the relevance of the statement that y prime assumes the value 0 to what you are saying?
I'm saying at those points, the equation is consistent.
What do you mean by consistency of equation?
Ma'am, means it is means left hand side is equal to right hand side.
I don't know. So what happens then? So what is the sort of?
I'm just asking if had it been the case that y is not equal to 0, but we got some solution curve which goes to 0 at some points, let's say A and B on the x-axis. Then could we include those points?
I'll just write down. It's just too fast for me to absorb what you're saying. Yeah. So what are you saying? At some point A, B on the real axis, what happens? What happens? Say that again.
At those points, the function goes to 0.
Which function? F of x, y.
Which is the solution of the original ODE.
solution of the original ODE. Okay, so original
sir.
ODE is y prime equal to f of xy. So we are just looking at a ODE or maybe some initial value problem, right? So let's say y of x naught equal to y naught. Now we are saying, what are you saying? At the points AB, what happens?
If the solution is going to 0.
So let y1 be a solution of this, where be a solution on the interval AB.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. On the interval AB, then what happens?
At the end points, the function is going to 0.
As x tends to A, y1 tends to 0 is what you're trying to say.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
as x tends to B, y1 tends to 0. Okay, then
Ma'am, in that f of xy is of the form 10, let's say 10 by 3, means it is of the form xy, f of xy.
f of xy is x times y.
Yes, ma'am. So at those end points, the f of xy is going to 0.
Okay.
So f prime should go to 0. That is what I'm asking. If it is not going to 0, then we cannot include those endpoints in our solution.
So that's what I don't understand. What is the relevance of y prime going to 0 here? That's what I'm asking.
I mean, in the original solution, it was given, no, y prime equals to f of xy.
Okay, so if y prime, so anyways, so what is the point of discussion here?
And I was just asking that those endpoints will not be taken in the solution, no?
Why?
If f prime does not go to 0, which is not f prime, y1 prime, sorry, my mistake. Y1 prime does not go to 0, which is the solution of the ODE.
I don't understand, what is it you're trying to say? Sorry. What is y1 prime? Meaning, how does y1 prime come into the picture here? Y1 prime is just satisfies this. Okay, good. That's all. No, y1 prime would be f of x y1 x, right? That's all we need on the interval AB, correct? That's what you're saying. So if y1 is a solution, right? Yeah, sorry.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
My mistake. I got it.
Yeah, so y1 is a solution of this. So that means just this. Yeah, that's all. Now, outside that interval, you have to investigate what happens in that case, in that particular example. That's all.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
My mistake. I got it. Yes,
no, I don't mean I'm not sure I understood your question correctly, but nevertheless, if you are satisfied, okay.
I got my problem.
Okay.
I got
Good. Okay.
Ma'am.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Ma'am, can you discuss the solutions beyond -1 to 1 briefly, ma'am? Means because I'm confusing.
So all this example is saying, by the existence and uniqueness theorem, there is a unique solution on the interval -1 to 1. And what is that I am trying to convince you by the rest of the side is, I'm saying that, outside this interval, there are solutions of this initial value problem, which will agree with x square minus 1 to the power 5 by 3 on the interval -1 to 1, but b will be something else. For example, here's an example. If you look at y tilde defined as here, y tilde is x square minus 1 to the power 5 by 3 on the open interval -1 to 1. You have no choice. Any solution of this interval, of this initial value problem on the interval -1 to 1 has to look like this. That's what we have proved. Now, outside that interval, you put it to be 0. Then y tilde is a solution of this initial value problem on the interval -infinity to infinity. In fact, if you look at x square minus 1 to the 5 by 3, this is also a solution to this initial value problem on the interval minus infinity to infinity. So this initial value problem may have many solutions, possibly, but on the interval -1 to 1, there is only a unique solution that is given by x square minus 1 to the power 5 by 3. Now, outside the interval -1 to 1, we can only guarantee, so this theorem of Picard and Lindelof So the uniqueness theorem is due to Picard and Lindelof. The existence theorem is due to Peano. Outside the interval -1 to 1, the Picard-Lindelof theorem does not tell us anything. But the solution is guaranteed to exist outside the interval -1 to 1. In fact, the solution is guaranteed to exist throughout the real line, thanks to the part 1 of that theorem, which is due to Peano's existence theorem. That's all.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is that okay? Please ask if there's still some doubts.
No, ma'am. Okay,
Yeah,
ma'am.
is that okay? Okay, good. All right.
Ma'am, I had one doubt.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, why, like if we want to find interval of unique solution, like you can consider this case, how would we initially choose that interval minus epsilon naught to epsilon naught, the first interval from which we want to start?
See, the first interval here is chosen by looking at the function f and fxy. See, so what is the theorem says? F and fxy, sorry, f, the function f and the partial derivative of f with respect to the y variable better be continuous. So the interval is chosen keeping in mind these two conditions are satisfied.
Ma'am, but like this is satisfied in the interval x belong to -infinity to infinity and y equal to -1 to, sorry ma'am, it's -2 to 0. I'm trying to construct a domain in the theorem, like domain to apply the theorem.
Rectangle, this
Yes,
rectangle.
So, like my interval is -infinity to infinity, x, and y belong to.
A is -infinity, B is infinity, is what you're trying to say.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and C is
0. -2.
C is -2 and Y is
0.
Y is 0. So if C is -2 and Y is 0, are we fine?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll just write. I'll just write. So, so I have fxy in this example to be 10/3, xy 2/5. Correct? So you're saying let's take the rectangle to be all points x and y such that x is -infinity to infinity and y is, did you say 2 here? No, you said -2 and 0, right? You said -2 and 0, right? So now what are you saying? What is this rectangle? Here the function f is continuous and also the partial derivative of f with respect to y variable. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So now what is your question?
Now, if we go by theorem, the theorem says that we will get some interval, sub-interval of -infinity to infinity in x, in which we will have a unique solution.
Containing this point, no, y of x naught equal to y naught. So the theorem says there will be a subinterval of -infinity to infinity containing the point x naught. And that point x naught is 0 in this example.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct.
So, ma'am, this information doesn't tell about like how do we choose an initial interval. That is what I'm asking.
So let's say, so if x naught is 0 and you are looking at, what is this? Now your theorem says that there is a solution on some subinterval of the interval -infinity to infinity, which is the entire real line containing the origin. So that interval, let's say, looks like this, right? Is that okay? So on this subinterval, if you don't like -epsilon naught, nothing is heard. I can always do this. No, this is what I'm trying to say. There's no loss of generality. Any interval around origin, you can find an epsilon naught such that an interval of the sort form -epsilon naught to epsilon naught is contained in that interval around the origin. Isn't that true? This is just a way of fixing things, just to sort of illustrate to you how do you apply that argument one more time. You don't have to do it. You can actually work with this interval itself as long as this subinterval does not hit the points -1 and 1. That's the only thing that you have to be careful about. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am, got it.
Yes, yes. So this, you pick any open interval. So if you don't like this, you pick any other interval around the origin. Yeah, let's say A1, B1. Yeah, so let's say instead of writing minus epsilon naught epsilon naught, you say that Picard's existence and uniqueness theorem guarantees that there is a unique solution of this initial value problem on the interval A1 B1. Now you say that at the endpoints A1 and B1, you can apply again, repeat this argument again, apply Picard's existence and uniqueness theorem. When can you apply this argument again? Provided both the function f and the function partial derivative of f with respect to y are continuous, where in a neighborhood of points b1 f of a1, appropriately, f of a1 y b1 and y of a1 and things like that. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe I sort of confused you by writing minus epsilon dot by epsilon. There's nothing, you don't have to take symmetric, you don't have to take epsilon naught. You work with what you like. But anytime you are repeating this argument, you have to be careful that the statement, the hypothesis of Picard's existence and uniqueness theorem is satisfied. That's all. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Okay. So I think you might have a class. I'll just stop this recording and so how do I do that? How do I stop the recording?